Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very difficult act to follow after the first panel and then Suresh speaking about the e-learning and the learning which is becoming all pervasive in every aspect. As we start this summit on a learning and development platform and we look at only that as a focus, the topic that we are going to discuss is going to be somewhat a new age topic. The reason I say new age is 11 years back when we were talking about diversity and inclusion, it seemed like a absolute buzzword. And diversity and inclusion meant having more women in the workforce because retail was always skewed and we would want more and more young women to participate in the leadership role, in the front end, in the stores, become more store managers. And that's where I started my journey to say, okay, how can we get more women? And that shouldn't have been a program to get more women in work. I mean, why would we have a program which talks about diversity and wants one particular gender to come in? That itself is a platform for inequality or not giving an equal platform. So there were so many debates and discussion there. As we speak about skilling today and we talk about the importance of learning, development, organizational development, and breaking the glass ceiling, this is the apt time to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the morning session, we saw about great places of work saying that we've become very closer to the international benchmarks, and equity could be one great leveler when we talk about diversity and inclusion. Today, I have with me absolutely brilliant champions, not only in the world of HR, but I personally know most of them, and I've seen the kind of work that they have done with their existing organizations and overall for the industry as participants, as contributors to the entire HR framework on which today a lot of retailers are imbibing those values. So I don't have a particular question for all of them, but one very important thing on D&I that we discussed this before the session was, is it only a buzzword? Is it something which is fashionable? And is it a CEO's vision? If so, how does it get cascaded to the last common denominator in the organization? And for this, Bidisha, if you'd like to speak about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ameesha. Thank you, Train. It's always great to come back, and I'm really happy that we're doing this session in person, and I hope that we continue in larger numbers. And very happy to be sharing the stage with all my co-panelists, and of course, Ameesha, we've worked very closely together. So, a brilliant question, and I think, how this needs to happen, and is this a CEO's, is it on the prerogative of all the CEOs? I think where I see it is as an organization or across some of the colleagues that I speak with, it's definitely maybe the top, right at the top. So the CEO and the CXO level leadership team is thinking about it. And of course, that makes a huge difference because, yes, that's when you get your sponsorship. However, I think where the challenge that we are facing is, like you rightly said, Ameesha, how do you percolate that? How do you get somebody to realize that why should I get more women into the workplace? Why should I get more people with disabilities in the workplace? How does it help me achieve my business goal? So I think while we've moved along, we've come a long journey, we've come a long way in creating understanding about diversity. But I think the whole connecting, putting together diversity, equity, inclusion into the last person on the store, right? And not only staying at the CEO's agenda is where we're lacking. And I think some of the things that I've noticed, which changes very quickly if your senior leadership is actually sponsoring the change, is not just L&D interventions, but systemic changes. So whether it means ensuring your talent acquisition practices are right, ensuring your employee experience practices are equitable, like very, very clearly, Yashaswini spoke that When I speak of equity, an image comes in my mind. Imagine, three people watching a match, okay? Three people watching a match across a high wall. And one person is really tall, so they can actually look up to the wall and see it clearly. The other person raises their leg and they can see it. And maybe the other person is not able to see it at all. So what equity does is sort of customize it for their needs. So the person who's already tall doesn't need any help, but the person who's just reaching like this maybe needs one stool to go up. But the person who's completely unable to see needs maybe 3 stools to go up. And I think that is the image that always stays with me, that when we make policies which are systemic, we have to ensure that we're also looking at being mindful of, are we being equitable? Are we looking at women from different age groups, women from different walks of life? When we're talking about people with disabilities, are we creating infrastructure to support them as well? So I think while it's definitely on the agenda of most CXO and leadership teams, the challenge and the journey that we need to make as an industry is to really percolate it. So let's say to the last person on the store, to our store managers, to our functional heads, department heads, will they become champions of this?
So, Neelam, would you like to add on to this, the same part?
So I think in terms of moving it down is very important. I think the last person in my team should be able to understand it. And I think from the buzzword, it's become a holy cow now. तो अभी मना नहीं कोई करता है. Nobody says that. I can't say नहीं, मैं नहीं hire करूँगा.
I'm just going to just interrupt her here. The buzzword to holy cow is something that I've heard so many times offline. यार ये करना पड़ रहा है. CEO का vision है. So from there to come down to the point where actually we imbibe it in our stores and especially in warehouses, I think it's a great leap. So I had to interrupt her there.
Sorry. So I think, congratulations. It took us a decade, but now it's at least become a holy cow. So there is no, how do I say, there's no hostile sexism. So people don't say, ये औरत है मैं नहीं लूँगा, ये disabled है मैं नहीं लूँगा. But I think deep inside, what has started is like a digital chori. So microaggressions have come in. So I will not take her, but I will find other reasons of not hiring her. And one thing that I want to also empathize is that, you see, my store managers or people below are coming from an ecosystem wherein probably it's not the buzzword or the holy cow. And hence, empowering, educating him that this is the way to go. And also, and I hate this, but making a business case out of it. I love what you said in the beginning, Ameesha, that I can't make a business case. It's like women have to breathe, women have to do job. So the assumption when I make a business case is that I'm saying you are majority and let me, make a business case. Why should you make a business case? What's wrong in it? If I have to make a business case, I will say that I will not hire competent or incompetent. On gender and disability, I should not make a business case. Having said that, coming down to practicality, I think let's make it, help him achieve his OKR, make him earn more, I would say, wages with the help of these women and people with disability. And when he sees a value in it, he will add it. However, it has to start with education. So, and most of them are, as I say, normalize certain things. Like women not coming to work is very normal, no? It's a normal thing that women will not work. Or if they work, इनको जल्दी जाना होगा, तो मैं overtime नहीं कराऊंगा. See, these are the problems that you have to, and if you can solve these problems at the base for them, it is very easy to solve. You can't, and you have to also understand, cognitive biases cannot be killed by cognitive intervention. So sitting in a training room, talking to everybody, please hire more women, won't happen. But if you hire a group of 10, 15 women, you place them, and then they're able to show results. Now that is when then bias will go down. Because now he's seeing the results of it. Na? And I think the buy-in will come more easy. So obviously it should start with educating and awareing, but I think it should move down to showing them how does it not change anything for you.
Great. I know this question should actually be even asked to Chroma as well as Magic Pin to bring in a different perspective, but because I'm aware of the time, I'm going to just jump in. And Robin, Chroma has had amazing customer centricity, policies which actually help diversity and inclusion. At this point in time, when we are in the earlier session, we saw about the digital world, and we are talking about electronics retailing becoming a very different kind of customer centricity at that point in time. How do you imbibe or inculcate the diversity and inclusion part within the front end stores? I'm not talking about e-commerce at this point in time.
Yeah. See, what we have done, and it is, one, it came naturally to us. One, because of the buzzword, we were working for it. And then it came naturally because what we saw at the front line and in the stores, diversity works. Rather, diversity trumps ability at times. Along with diversity, if we have inclusion, that's what we are now aiming in for, and equity for all. See, the kind of stores that we have different product categories, and there are certain categories wherein customers who walk into the store, they relate more. If I talk about women, they relate more to women. So if it is like kind of a home appliance, if it is something which has to do with kitchen, if it has to do something with personal grooming, a customer who is a woman or of the same gender would relate more to a store staff who is of the same gender. It works very well for us. Similarly, what we have also seen is, and it's pan-India, women are more hardworking, they are more customer service oriented, and they give us more results. And I'm not talking about just about the stores. I've seen in my team also. Right? They are the ones who put in more effort. They are the ones who are more passionate about it. It's against the biases that we have for women in this panel. If you see, right? Yeah. So correct. So it's working perfectly well for us. We also have also initiated for the PwDs in our stores, where we have created separate, like Bidisha was also talking, we need to create the infrastructure for them so that they become comfortable. So making them inclusive of the environment that they have, also sensitizing teams, that is very important. Sensitizing other team members that these are part of the team and they are equal. That's the challenge which most of the retailers or the organizations have. We somehow have been able to do it. One, because of the ethics and the code of conduct that we have, that's very deep rooted within Chroma as the Tata culture. So if you ask me as Chroma, do we find this as challenge? No, actually it is helping us, and rather it is very productive for both in stores and also in the office.
So you mentioned about unconscious bias, and I'm going to ask Tanas in a minute, Tanas. But before that, we've got a gentleman here from Magic Pin. Aniket looks after Magic Pin, and it's a very different business format. How do you inculcate the values of diversity and inclusion in a business like yours? And you would like to talk about what are the steps that you have taken to integrate the same?
So let me give very business perspective to diversity and inclusion. I think it's not a buzzword anymore, it's necessity of the business. We have seen that after getting diversity in our team, the perspectives, more and more perspectives have come in. The results are there, right? So earlier a bunch of boys just trying to figure out how the fashion page should look like yielded very bad results. And few of our colleagues coming in, they just changed the whole landscape, and the CTRs and the way you monitor business has changed. So, I mean, it's need of the hour that we are hiring diversity candidates, and I feel guilty saying them as diversity candidates because they are the equals in the team. Another important point, because we are also talking about how can we do it for the frontliners, right? Where they are probably not as educated or they come from a very different background. So I think while a lot of panelists, this panel and the earlier panel have talked about educating them, I feel that technology can be leveraged to kind of not only teach them, but also to monitor what these learnings are resulting into. So for example, one of the initiatives where we are working with Train itself, that each of the frontliners will have a personalized dashboard where he or she can see what are the customer ratings that they are getting. And they can kind of evaluate themselves before and after taking the workshops. And we can felicitate them, we can give them rewards for the good awards that for the good work that they are doing, and probably it will set an example for other folks in the frontline staff. So, I mean, yeah, diversity is something which is important, but I would encourage the teams here to sort of leverage technology to kind of build a result-oriented learning pedagogy.
Thanks, Aniket. Coming to you, I mean, Tanaz, you've been a champion for this for the longest period. And we are talking about learning and development. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we definitely have to bring in some amount of design, some amount of delivery that actually talks about the sensitization, talks about the vision. How do you ensure that the L&D program development as well as the people who are imparting the training do not bring in unconscious bias, or at least mitigate the unconscious bias that happens at workplace?
Sure, it's a great question, and I'm going to take a detour where I'm going to say that it's not just about how we look at L&D programs, but how we look at the entire HR processes that we in the organization. And other panel members, Bidisha, Neelam, and Robin, have already alluded to that in some shape or form. So Robin talked about our TCOC, and one of the code of conduct element is the fact that respect and dignity is very important. So we start by, and you spoke about L&D programs per se. So even in our induction programs, we start by addressing the elephant in the room. Are you here because you knew somebody? Are you here because your caste is XYZ? Are you here because you know XYZ language? Are you here for any other reason apart from experience and competence? And the answer to that has to be, coming from the audience itself. So that kind of clicks in place that it is not just what I'm hearing here, but it is what I will experience in the organization. Even when we were speaking earlier, I spoke about one of our category heads who is an expat, and she wanted to have only ladies doing footwear, for ladies' footwear. Now that again is an unconscious bias as to why would a male buyer not be able to buy for women. So our training programs, even in product training, would focus on this. Who can do the job? Who can be the best fit for the job is experience. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with anything else. So a lot of times, Ameesha, just making our, each of our experience, I wouldn't call it just L&D program. I wouldn't just call it our reward and recognition program or our, induction program, but every place where we touch employees, if we are able to demonstrate this innate point that we make of, being aware of our biases, calling them out and saying there's nothing wrong in calling out these biases. So let's not penalize people who call out and who say, hey, look, I had this bias. I don't think this person who is a PwD will be able to do this kind of work. He or she has genuine concern. So encourage that person to talk, get him or her on board. And it is very difficult. In fact, I would advise people that if you can't see a sustenance of supporting PwDs in your workforce and seeing them grow in the organization, just like you can the other retail employees, you should take a pause before you introduce something just on a whim. That would be my two-bit. Thank you.
So I'm going to digress a bit here. I think that's an excellent point. Do you need to do this because it's the need of the hour and the buzzword? And if you are doing it, are you doing it right? How is it that the L&D teams can actually make a very effective case, not only for the business, but for the society? I think I'm talking about a very larger good here, but my entire interest here is to say, how can this team and this room convince the business that it is good for business? It has a positive brand impact. It has positivity in terms of productivity. And if we have to convince the business, Bidisha or Neelam, whichever, both of you can actually take this up to say, how do you convince the business through L&D? and I'm not trying to talk only about training programs, but overall culture of the organization to become more diverse, more integrated and inclusive? How do you convince the business? Because let me tell you, I've been on the business side. And if somebody had told me 15 years back that you need to do X with women and Y with persons with disability and Z with LGBTQ, I would have said, धंधे पे ध्यान देने दो, मुझे margins deliver करना है. And that is the reality. I mean, what Kumar spoke about speed everywhere being ubiquitous, on a daily basis you're fighting fires in retail because something or the other is so dynamic and so changing. And let me not even get started on the attrition. So in all of this, how do you imbibe through learning and development that to the business that this is important? A very large question, but I'd like both of them to address it.
Yeah, I think great question, Ameesha. And I think, what has worked for me, whether I, in my stint in my earlier organization and current, it's always starting with, why is this important, and to have that conversation. Because I remember the earlier panelists, they were saying that usually training leads, we start doing something and then you later realize, ye karna kyun hai? So just to give you a case study, I'm currently with Welspun, and we've done for a larger societal benefits. Being a textile industry largely, there's been a lot of scraps that come out of textiles. So where we actually have a different line of business where we have integrated the women around the plant areas, and we have a different line called Spun, where out of this waste product, we actually create laptop sleeves, bags, etc. Now it's getting retailed in stores like IKEA. So thereby you generate employment, you help the society. And I think that's something that, it becomes a case study wherein sometimes, when you just try to say, hey, we need to do this, for me, what's worked is to say that let me try this pilot, let me see, let me show you the result, and then, then I leave the choice to you. Because sometimes when you go with a lot of Harvard studies or, Stanford studies, they'll say, हमारे company में नहीं चलेगा. It's challenges are very different. So I think what always works is for you to be pragmatic, understand the challenge of that business, like Tanaz correctly said, understand whether it's sustainable and you're not doing it just because you have to, and then try a pilot and a prototype and show them that this has the power to sort of scale and it has results that you can get home. That being said, I think what I also propose to make systemic changes is, I'm a big fan of this concept of creating allies, but not only just allies, but actionable allies. So what I mean by actionable allies is managers of, many of these women or people with disabilities are sometimes not their best sponsors. So how do you get them in the whole culture sphere to become an ally, not just to say, okay, I have my hands up, if Bidisha needs help, I'll support her, but I proactively become an actionable ally. So mentoring her, supporting her, talking about her work at other forums, if she's staying silent in a meeting and people just sometimes, obviously women are invisible. Many of us know that if we sit in a meeting, we don't get noticed, right? We're just sitting there. So then how do you, as a manager, being a male manager, inviting the person to say, hey, Bidisha, you haven't spoken, so do you want to say that? So there are various clues in which you can create actionable allies across the system. And like you correctly said, it cannot happen without systemic cultural changes at different areas. So one, of course, for me, what has always worked is to create a case study, show that, prototype that, show the benefits, and then say, hey, we ran this, because very few leaders will say no to saying, let me try something. If it doesn't work, I'll scrap it, So they mostly allow that. And two is to work with the entire organization, which is not only just women, but also the male counterparts, and helping them realize, how their support and sponsorship can actually change the ecosystem of the organization. Neelam?
So what worked for us at Bigbasket was, one is, the basic thing that you have to understand, men and women have started working only for the last 40, 50 years maybe together. So it is difficult for both. It's difficult for men to see women around, but it's difficult for women also come out of the home and be here and be as competitive and all that. So I think you have to work both the ways. You have to solve problems for the business, which I again say is a business case that you want. So for example, in our case, the biggest problem for a store manager was slot closure, which means I come to the office and I realize 30% of the people are not there, and then which means I will not be able to deliver. Now, when you have a lot of women, so we had about 30 women, and to start with about 4 or 5 years back, and we realized that, and it's a fact also, that feminine energy looks for a lot of predictability. So I will have to 5:30 go back home, and hence, or I have to come, so I'll finish quickly. Or if I'm not coming tomorrow, I'll tell you because I may need holidays. And hence your attrition comes down. So there is no surprises in the morning. Now, when you solve this for him, you see one of the biggest KRAs and OKRs that you're affecting for him is his slot closure. Why will he not hire them? He will go ahead and hire because he also sees the benefit of it in it. So I think the first thing that you have to see is, one, understand that what is he getting out of it by making this change, which is unconsciously so against. How can you help him do that change? And the second thing is, I think, looking at things which are normalized but which are not. And hence saying that women will not be here and we will not be there, probably putting some women there and telling everybody now it's working, do you also want to? Because in our biases, so many things which are normal are normalized, not normal are normalized. So I look at it, हाँ ऐसा ही चलता है ना, ये ठीक ही तो है, और ऐसा मैंने देखा भी नहीं ना, तो मैं क्यों करूँगा? So for me, I think Bigbasket, two things work. One is help them. This initiative should be able to help them achieve something tangible. They should be able to see benefits of it. Secondly, a lot of awareness. It is very difficult for even me to understand that this is my bias. The first thing I'll say, no, this is not my bias. I have a daughter. Why will this be a bias? This is the first question. There are a lot of fallacies in your information also. So a lot of awareness creation at all levels is very important, because at least 50% of them are not even aware that this is not acceptable. That's not how should I be thinking. So I think two things will work for us.
Yeah. I like to add one point, right? As a business leader, one thing which business leaders are very cognitive about is that at the end of the day, we are dealing with consumers, right? Who are coming to the app or who are going to the store. So it's very important that we need to build inclusion within the team. If there is empathy within the team, that will get translated to the consumers which come to the store. If a frontliner doesn't know how to deal with women because he doesn't have women colleagues, how will he deal with women consumers, right? Same goes for people with physical disabilities or LGBTQ. So I think as an HR leader, you have to make the business leader aware of this fact that, hey, inclusion is important because that will get translated to the consumers.
So I think all of you spoke about awareness. That leads me to my next question. Some of you said that the store managers were the learning champions. They were the flag bearers in terms of imparting or disseminating knowledge to the front end staff. Are they the DEI champions also? Robin and then probably Tanas can weigh. And if they are DEI champions, is there a special kind of a, I wouldn't say learning, but training or some kind of a intervention that you guys do, which makes them actually fight for the cause and actually make sure that there is a recognition or a rainbow at the end of it to say that, you know, this zone or this store or this particular area has actually excelled in it. So how do you tackle that?
Yep. In our stores, yes, store manager is at the helm, and he's the one or she's the one who is responsible for this entire initiative and is the champion. Along with that, we also have cluster managers who are leading the stores. So it's one, it is like institutionalized by the saying that this is a part of the role that you're doing. And it is not part of the KRA, by the way. It is part of the role that you're doing. It has to be there. One of the diversity thing that has worked for us is also about, we also look in for the experience. Rather, we don't look for experience in our stores. We have a very healthy mix of experience and non-experience stuff, and that is working for us. So these are the ones, earlier we used to look for experienced staff to come in. What used to happen, there used to be a curve which used to be a unlearn and then a learn curve, and people, when they used to come to the set expectations, it would be about 6 months, 7 months that they would come on board to that level. With the freshers, whatever you tell them, it's a clean state. So whatever you tell them, they'll just follow whatever is being said. So it works perfectly well, and Chroma, as it is in a rapid expansion phase, moving to tier 2, tier 3 cities, this is like blessing in disguise for us. It's perfectly working well. And yes, store managers are the ones who are championing this. There are programs, refreshers being done. The entire ecosystem is wherein, uh, uh, like you were saying, it is about starting from the top, right? It has to be the empathy for each and every individual who is over there, whether it is gender, whether it is experience, whether whatever it is, empathy towards each other, giving them the equal platform. How do people also, like Bidisha also mentioned, how do people also interact within meetings, with briefings which are happening over there? Don't let anybody, because of any biases, just be around, just be let around, right? So have that inclusion in there. I think it's a culture that you need to set in. Policies and guidelines would be just about, they'll just help you in doing that. But if from top, starts from the top, right? And if starts from the top, people see the leaders exhibiting those kind of behaviors, it actually blends perfectly well within the culture. And that's what I've seen in Chroma happening.
Very well said by Robin. I just have a different point of view. बेचारे store manager की life को भी थोड़ा देखो. He is the learning champion. He is the ethical champion. He is the champion for for the business. He needs to ensure shrinkage is down, sales are up, like for like growth is on. Put yourself there where you just put the store manager. It's very easy. One of the earlier panelists spoke about, it's very easy for us to talk about all this in these kind of forums. Bidisha spoke about actionable allies, and that is, she's hit the nail on the head. How many times do we go down and do we say that, hey, look, you are having 2 PwDs here, have a common orientation program. Does everybody understand sign language in the store? Is the store manager aware of how he or she needs to be interacting with those two? There is a POSH complaint with a PwD. Are we having in the POSH committee the sign language expert there? So the entire, somebody spoke about the entire ecosystem. It has to be designed with those design principles. You cannot just operate in those silos and say, okay, I have a policy, I have a program, boom, it's going to happen, it's going to get deployed. It doesn't work that way because the store manager already is completely, taken up with, we've spoken about it earlier also, he's taken about with so many different challenges. So our job is to give him or her the resources, the training, the facilitation, and the necessary infrastructure to ensure that he is able to take in the PwD, neither treating that person with deference, nor treating that person like just be on the side, let others do the work and you just be around. So either of the two approaches don't work. It needs a lot of hard work. That's all that I'm saying. And all of us are in that journey. Some of us probably have traveled a lot more distance. Some of us are still there.
I think fantastic. I like that little diverse view there, because finally the store manager is the person who has tons and tons of KPIs to manage. That brings me back to the metrics that you have as HR leaders, as L&D experts, to measure how diverse or inclusive is your diversity inclusion agenda being fulfilled. What is it that you do if the metrics don't? I've already heard you say that if it is not sustainable, it is something that you can't manage, you can defer it. Do it after 2 years, but do it well. Absolutely. Today, what are the metrics that each of you apply? Aniket, I'll start with you. In your organization, to measure the efficacy of this program, or to see if it is successful or not so successful?
So I think as a startup, we are in very early phase where there are not enough strict KPIs, and we are aware of the fact that that is something which needs to be built in smaller companies from day zero. Right now, the KPIs are very simple: number of women candidates, number of PWE candidates that are there in the system, and there is a conscious thought process going around in the hiring managers where I would say these are not hard metrics, but these are metrics that they want to adhere to. So yeah, that's what we are doing currently.
So I think for us, again, of course, numbers matter in business. So of course, the number of women you have on board, number of people with disabilities, all of this is there. But I think personally, what I would like to say, I think it's easier to get people, but very difficult to retain them, right? So if I was doing this, and we do this within Welspun, I proposed this earlier organization as well, is to look at how long are these people staying with you, right? That's the one. So how long, what's their gestation period within the organization? What's their retention percentage? That's one. Second is, of course, if it's for women, and that's what we actually run an initiative within Welspun called Women of Welspun or WOW, and where we do it for the blue collars, the retail staff, and the staff in the corporate and other offices. Creating avenues for women to learn and grow. So the metrics there would be how many interventions, then as I'll pick up from what you said, it's like carpet bombing. You know, you'll have to see it everywhere. Because sometimes when you want people to internalize something, so how many such initiatives are running and who's driving them? So one is, of course, the sponsors or the managers, the CEO, the women themselves, the people at the shop floor, people at the corporate office. So how many initiatives and how many of them are all aligned and speaking about inclusion? And I think the most important part is to actually hear from the women, I think Nandini spoke about the NPS. So asking them, would you recommend your organization to another women colleague? And I think that's the biggest truth of the pudding, asking a person with disability, would you recommend this organization to another colleague? So to sum it up, one, of course, the NPS, checking whether that's a great metrics to ask. It's simple to do. Just one question, doesn't cost any money. Two, seeing how many initiatives are you running at different levels for all across the level, and HR and L&D doesn't always have to drive it. You can get functional leaders to do it. And three, of course, do measure rates of incumbents coming in, but definitely measure how long are they staying with you.
In addition to whatever Aniket and Bidisha spoke about, I think we also need to see in our respective organizations at every level, what is the kind of attrition that we are facing. Bidisha spoke about attrition, but I would look at, at my start level, I have very healthy percentages and mix. Why is it that as progressively the colleagues graduate to department manager level or AMO or store manager level, there is such a sharp drop in the number of women colleagues? So what is it that we can do via our policies, programs in order to alleviate this? The second point is on pay parity. I don't know how many of us look at, if a store manager who is a male, what is he or she making, vis-a-vis what a lady store manager is making, comparable experience, comparable profiles. Because these are important conversations to have, and it is always important to have these conversations with data. Rather than keeping it a very emotional conversation, it is important to bring business outcomes on the table and then have these conversations. So just adding to what has already been shared.
In fact, I'm aware of the time, and I think that was my last question. Diverse workforce, or as we call underrepresented workforce. Could be persons with disability, could be women, could be LGBTQ. What kind of career progression would we look at? And how does the organization imbibe that? A lot of students, trainees who we train come back to us after 2 to 3 years to say, I was a packer or I was a customer service associate and I'm still that. Do we give them a fair, equal opportunity? Or do we make it important to have that equity or equitable opportunity? How do we look at young women breaking the glass ceiling? How do we look at persons with disability not just doing the most basic entry-level job, but is probably a store manager someday? And how do we make sure that an LGBTQ is not only in the back office but also in front facing the customer? These are questions that come to train on a daily basis. What is career progression, and how does the HR, L&D, as well as organizational development handle that? So I have exactly maybe 2 minutes to summarize this before I open the floor for question. I'm sure there are many. So anybody would like to take that up in terms of the career progression part of it?
Okay. In our organization, I think one thing that is anybody in Chroma can vouch for is, we call it internally as a PICS program, which is Potential Identification Centers. And it's like part of a DNA. What we do is we create equal opportunities of learning and growth for each and every one. And likewise, there is a very structured growth program for each role. So from a store associate, if you have to become a manager or a assistant department manager, there are clear parameters which have been defined, the competencies been identified. Along with that, what we also do, because you said 2 minutes, I want to talk more about it. Along with that, we also do is we do a budding up of these probable candidates who would then make up to the next level. Earlier, we used to do it annually, but because of the need which is there, because of the expansion which is happening, we do it twice in a year. And this is one of the programs that we run across for all the stores, for all roles, till head of the function. So all the people, on an average, if I have to tell you for all the roles, they're about 23% that we give growth every 6 months, which is there within the organization. And this is one of the reasons that we have a very low attrition rate also. Works perfectly well for us, but the only thing is that you need to be very fair. You need to define what growth is and how growth will be given to people. I think then it works perfectly well for the organizations.
I just want to add just one thing, that sometimes, when we look at growth, we always think it's this way, it's vertical. And then there is only one CEO and CEO and CFO, right? So I think it's important when we are making a competency assessment matrix to look at diagonal roles, horizontal roles, right? So, and I think that's another angle for all of us in the HR profession to stop thinking. And usually, why don't people want to move diagonally or horizontally? Because the pay never matches what the CEO gets. So there are evolved organizations where an R&D specialist, like let's say, for example, a Google or an Apple, they probably get more paid than the CEO and CXO, right? So I think from a comp and ben and a HR point of view, it's very important if you want clarity in roles and career growth. It's not always possible to promote everybody this way, vertically. So we need to look at innovative practices and have roles that are diagonal and horizontal in nature as well.
Thanks, Bidisha. I think if Lawrence is sitting here, I think we need a diversity and inclusion summit. Train and RAI should probably start thinking about it, because 1 hour is not enough. And I really thank them for, summarizing it in so succinctly. But I'm opening the floor for any questions that you may have for them. We have time for 2 questions. Please just ask your questions so that they have time to answer them.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. I asked this question from the perspective of predominantly hiring women within our organization, right? Now, recently we've hired a lot of young women within the organization, right? And we live in a very culturally diverse country. Now, what happens is when women get married or have a child, there's a lot of uncertainty as to where their future might take them. So as leaders within your own organizations, how do you traverse this?
Any particular person that you would want? No, anybody can answer.
Yeah.
So I think when this happens, right, one of the things that has worked for us, and I think it will work for everybody, is being able to provide mentorship, counseling, coaching. And these are very underrated, right? We usually tell them that we'll have a woman leader for you and, you can talk to her. But then you have to understand programs like Drona or Mitra, wherein they can talk openly, is also about how does she handle at a workplace. And I keep on saying this, that there are a lot of things that are normalized, which means in the name of empowerment, she does not realize is she being exploited. So earlier I was only staying at home and cooking, caring and feeding. Now I'm doing cooking, caring, feeding and also doing what my husband doing equally. But it is so normalized that I come back home and say, मुझे ही तो करना है और कौन करेगा? Now that, these small conversation of telling her, can you at least talk to somebody in the family? You understand? So I had a woman who was mentoring. It took me at least 4 sessions wherein we would practice every day. So once I would become her mother-in-law, then I would become her husband, then I would become her sister-in-law. And each time she's convincing me that I want to cook. Imagine such small things. So mentoring is a powerful tool. And we don't understand the answer is not in the organization. Answer is with her in her home. Most of the women are called superpower women. ऐसा कोई शब्द ही नहीं है. All right? Super woman कुछ नहीं होती है. इंसान है and I think she doesn't understand that I can talk. उसको पता ही नहीं है. Right? So I think the answer is not in the organization. The answer is tying up with an agency, having some mentored coaches, having some counseling agencies, wherein she's sure it's not spoken about at all, right? And then let her speak. That's it. She will find her own answers and come back.
And that's wonderfully said, Neelam. And also, Jack, to add, see, however much we say this, I still find myself after 17 years, and I never stopped working, throughout my childbirth, etc. I mean, I'm still always the one sort of telling at home, ye karna hai, wo karna hai. So I think we also need to train our male colleagues and ourselves that if women have to step out and, come back to work after they have a child, the husband, the partner, the entire ecosystem also has to be there to equip. Because today I still find, my women friends today who are doing very well will go home and only coordinate with the cook. They're supposed to do the grocery. They're all supposed to. I think there's a famous saying by Indira Nui, right? I mean, I can be his CEO. I come home and my mother said, you're not a good wife because you forgot to do X, Y, Z. You forgot to tell the cook, right? So I think somewhere, one, of course, is what she's saying, helping women empower to speak up their mind. 2, also realizing the responsibility of an actionable ally, and all of you are allies. I don't know if you're married or you have a partner. So when you do, remember what I said, you got to share her burden equally, and then, then it'll all fall in place.
So just one last thing, whilst we are doing what Neelam and Bidisha said, I think organizations also need to look at how do we make policies and programs which explicitly state that it is okay for a woman who is a recent mother and who has just come back to work after 6 months to go off after 6 hours of work or 5 hours of work, rather than her male colleagues or her other women colleagues look at the watch and say, oh, half day, So it is those kind of things also which is important. So whilst we do this mentoring piece, whilst we do this allyship, and whilst we do this community approach, it's important for the organization also to outline very clear, specific policies, which makes it very clear in unambiguous terms that she has the right to walk out, okay? And it's something that has been given for her comfort and for her to continue her association with the organization. So it's not a benefit, it's her, it's something that is provided to her. There should be no 2 ways about it. So that's from me.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think what you guys very correctly pointed out is it's very difficult for certain people to have these conversations, these very difficult conversations at home, right? That's what I find within my organization to be the challenge, right? Because there are some very high expectations kept from the family side, which can be very difficult to traverse along with your work, right? So thank you very much for your insight.
Thanks for your question. 50 seconds if anybody has any questions for the panelists before we close. No? Somebody? Yeah, I think, thank God this was not after lunch, otherwise I'd have a difficult time. I think I'd just like to close this to say that we heard some fantastic views. Systemic change and necessity was the buzzword that I saw when people were discussing D&I. equal opportunity DEI champions, making a business case, sensitization and awareness, playing a very important role in understanding the contribution of a diverse workforce, whether it is gender diversity, caste, creed, sexual preferences, or persons with disability. I think all of us have to play a part to see that a more inclusive workforce actually helps the organization move ahead. It is not going to be detrimental to the business if we adopt it in a sustainable manner, like the panelist mentioned. Thank you so much for patiently listening. And thank you, RAI, for giving us this opportunity to discuss a very important topic. Thank you.